Now we're back. All right. So we're going to move on into anxiety and chat a little bit about what anxiety is, some of the thinking styles that go along with anxiety. So I encourage you as we go through this just to identify what might feel familiar to you as a person and what might feel familiar to family members, students, children that you might have, other people you might know. So for those of you who haven't quite heard of the Yerkes-Dodson Law, it's a law that kind of states that there is an optimal level of stress, or that there is good stress and bad stress. So if you look over to where it says low on the curve, when we're not stressed at all, we might not have much motivation. And so our performance might actually stay low or decrease. And then when we're really stressed and it's kind of interfering with our social relationships or interfering with our concentration levels, that's when we might be really stressed and our performance will also stay low. But the Yerkes-Dodson Law states that there is this optimal level of stress that is adaptive for us, that pushes us to get things done and pushes us forward. It might help us plan for the future. It might signal a threat that is on the horizon for us. And it'll alert us to decide on an action. So an example of something that might be optimally stressed for me in particular, usually presentations or getting a project done might be something that would optimally stress me out and actually help me perform better at it. So I encourage you again just to think about times where you have felt optimal levels of stress, where you have been nervous about something and it's pushed you to perform better at it. So stress here, often when we're feeling too much anxiety, it's usually when we're anticipating a threat and we're underestimating our ability to cope with it. So we think that we don't have the resources or the strategies available to cope with a stress. And when that happens, our body will go into fight or flight mode and will prepare us to focus our attention. And this can be incredibly maladaptive for us and lead to a lot of different types of outcomes. I just saw someone else enter the room, so I'm going to let them in really quickly. I'm sorry about that. Okay. And then that will be it. I'll cap it at that so that I don't disrupt the presentation anymore. All right. So again, when we focus on too much anxiety, these are some of the statistics associated with it. So there's a 25% prevalence rate of anxiety difficulties in 13 to 18-year-olds. The median onset age is 7 years old, and approximately 2/3 of individuals who are struggling with difficulties with anxiety don't often receive treatment. And there might be a lot of co-occurring problems, things like behavior difficulties or depression. So for example, when you see your kid talking back or you're engaging in talking back behavior, there might be an underlying anxiety issue there. So I want to get into a bit of unhelpful thinking styles. Please take a look at the slide and I'll go through each of these. And I encourage you again to just think about what style of thinking you resonate the most with, which lands most for you, that you can identify with, or someone that's close to you. So for example, here we have all or nothing thinking, and that's usually called black and white thinking. So for example, if I'm not perfect, then I failed. It's either one or the other. Then we've got overgeneralizing. So seeing a pattern based on a single event. An example of that would be nothing good ever happens to me because I didn't get an A on this math test. Then there's things like mental filtering or disqualifying positives. So really just noticing the things that we didn't do that well at, but not seeing our successes. Or when we do have a success, saying something like, well, that doesn't count. And then we've got jumping to conclusions. So things like mind reading and fortune telling. Mind reading is us just assuming that we know what other people might be thinking about, or that we're predicting the future. We're like, I know that'll happen anyway, so I'm not going to tell my mom about this thing because I know she'll just get upset at me, would be an example of jumping to a conclusion. Then there are thinking styles like magnification and minimization. So magnification is when we blow something out of proportion, we make it a bigger deal than it is. And minimization is shrinking it so small that it's almost like it doesn't exist or that it's not a big deal. Then we have emotional reasoning. So assuming that because we feel a certain way, that what we're thinking about must be true. So the example here is, I feel embarrassed, so I must be an idiot. And then we've got the should thoughts. So using harsh words on ourselves, like I should have done that, I must have done this, or I ought to have done that, and can really bring about lots of feelings of guilt or make us feel like we have already failed at something. And then there's labeling. So oftentimes we can talk meanly to ourselves in our heads. And so saying, calling ourselves names or saying something mean to yourself, like I'm completely useless. So just labeling ourselves in a negative way. And then there's personalization. So this is us thinking that things that happen are more of our fault than it actually was. So we might over blame ourselves for things. So again, I'll just have each of you think a little bit about some of these thinking styles that ring true for you or ring true for people that are close to you. So over here, when we have too much anxiety, there are some effects that this would have, negative effects that it would have on our day-to-day life. There are different physical effects, emotional effects, and behavioral effects. So for physical effects, we've got things like our heartbeat rapidly beating or shortness of breath, so really shallow breaths, feeling sweaty, getting the clammy hands. Often you might hear kids complaining about stomach pains. That's a big one. And then there's emotional effects, things like crying, getting nervous, being easily irritable or angry, feeling kind of depressed or in a fog. And then there's the behavioral effects, like the difficulty concentrating, procrastinating on materials, assignments, homework, smiling and giggling, kind of ignoring feelings, the minimizing I was talking about before. Arguing with others, so that you might see some talking back behavior, that irritability. And then things like school refusal, something that also pops up a lot, really just not wanting to go to school, not wanting to put that effort in. And so I just, again, want to encourage some thought around the stress response. What does that stress response look like for you? And if you're not a student attending this tonight, what does the stress look like for your teen or students that you might be working with? And I'm going to go over to the chat because I think I saw a question get posted in there. And if anyone would like to post anything about what the stress response looks like for them, I would definitely welcome that. For me, just to share, I have the emotional effect that I normally get is that I'll cry at the drop of a pin if I'm feeling really stressed out. And I'll also lose my appetite. Those are big ones for me. And sometimes I'll do some smiling and giggling when I'm feeling stressed out as well. So I'll stop the share for a second and take a look at the questions. Oh, there's no questions there. But yeah, if anyone would like to post, feel free to do so. All right. So now we're going to get into coping with mindfulness. And if anyone's ever heard of this or has had any experiences with it, again, feel free to post that in the chat. So what is mindfulness? As I referred to a little bit earlier, I talked a lot about us doing things on autopilot. We often do things, we get lost in them. We often plant ourselves in the past and think about something that happened maybe a week ago, a month ago, a year ago. Or we might be planting ourselves in the future, thinking about, well, what is going to happen tomorrow, a week from now, a month from now? And often we're just doing our present moment on autopilot. And so mindfulness is really about slowing that autopilot down and paying attention to the present moment in a particular way. So it's on purpose, it's with the intention of paying attention to it, and non judgmentally. And I will break down what I mean by non judgmentally in a couple of slides from now. So there's lots of different ways to be mindful, and we're going to go through a few of those different strategies and practice some here tonight. So, mindfulness is trending right now, and it's also evidence based. There's been a lot of research around the practice of mindfulness in North American society, and there's been a lot of integration of mindfulness into schools. I know we're doing our mindfulness groups, for example, into the military, into athletic organizations such as the NFL or the NBA. I know a lot of athletes use meditation, mindfulness, really slowing that thinking process down. I also think it's important to acknowledge the roots of mindfulness and that it does come from Eastern traditions and was brought over to North America in between the 50s to the 70s and has slowly evolved over time to become part of our own practice. So here are some components of mindfulness. As I mentioned before, it's really about the attitude, the intention, and the attention that we pay. So it's rooted in this idea of non-judgment, which is really having this compassion for oneself, having compassion for ourselves as humans, and that we will have a range of emotions throughout the day, and learning to accept that that is okay, learning to observe those emotions. It makes me kind of think of that thinking style I was mentioning before about how sometimes people might have a tendency to label themselves negatively. So with mindfulness, it's really slowing that down and learning to just to hold gratitude or compassion for where we are in the moment, and meeting that with curiosity. So instead of feeling that frustration or anger towards ourselves, maybe just noticing like I am feeling frustrated and angry right now, and trying to cultivate patience for where we're at in the present moment. So, what are some benefits to mindfulness? Typically, when I think about mindfulness, I think about the response to stress. So, I'll use an example here about a trigger. So, let's say somebody says something mean to you. That would be the trigger. And we might have a certain response that we automatically go to when someone says something mean to us. So, maybe you'll say something mean back, maybe you'll walk away. Maybe you'll, I don't know, I'm just trying to think of different examples, but even just thinking about it for yourself, if someone says something mean to you, what will you do automatically? With mindfulness, we're looking for that space to respond in between. So someone says something mean, we work to pause that, and pausing can be done in lots of different ways. It can be through breathing, it can be through counting, and it's really just about us choosing our response in that moment. How do I want to respond right now when someone says something mean? It's the power of observing that emotion. So we can still feel the emotion we're feeling, but instead it's about selecting our response rather than being managed by that emotion. So, what mindfulness is not? Often, mindfulness can get equated to something passive. Sometimes I know when people think about mindfulness, they'll think about meditation and having it be a passive experience, but it's not passive necessarily. It does take intention to be in the present moment. It's not a shutting off of thoughts. It's really just allowing all thoughts, regardless of what they are, to pass through. We're really just trying to notice the thoughts and observe what the thoughts are. And it's not necessarily a quick fix. The thing with mindfulness is that it does take time and practice and to form a habit of thinking mindfully. So when we think of battle of the minds, we think about anxious thinking versus mindful awareness. So anxious thinking is really that biased attention. So if I'm really stressed out about something, I'm only paying attention to the thing I'm stressed out about. But mindful awareness is really just observing like, oh, I am feeling stressed out about that right now. Anxious thinking is, again, very past and future oriented, whereas mindful awareness is more in the present. What am I doing in the here and the now? Anxious thinking, we become often identified with our thoughts, relating back to those thinking styles we went through earlier. Mindful awareness is more decentering ourselves from our thoughts and really thinking about our sense of connection with ourselves and others. Anxious thinking is very similar to a rumination or being on a loop. It's kind of like getting a song stuck in your head. And I do this a lot. Like I'll think of a thought and I'll just keep thinking about it and get more and more anxious about it. So it can be in a loop in your head. Whereas mindful awareness is more about the direct experience. And often grounding techniques are really helpful for that, which we will go through when we go through some of the exercises. And then anxious thinking is often judgmental. We're possibly saying negative or mean things to ourselves and our minds, possibly thinking those things about others. Mindful awareness is really practicing that non-judgment, allowing things to exist as they exist. This is a quote about mindfulness that I really like, that I think really sums up nicely that experience of that present moment. So mindfulness is to be aware when you are breathing in and to be aware when you are breathing out. It is the capacity to be of what is here. Anything can be the object of mindfulness. Your breath, the sky. It is to be in touch with our felt experience in each moment. So again, when I encourage students that I work with to think in a more mindful way, I usually start with something simple like brushing your teeth, and encourage participants here to do the same today. Just at night or in the morning when you're brushing your teeth, really becoming aware of what it's like to pull the toothpaste out, the toothbrush out, open up the toothpaste, put the toothpaste on the bristles, what it feels like in your mouth. Are there some teeth that hurt? Some that don't hurt, any other sensations that you feel. And that can be a nice way of interrupting a really automatic process for a lot of us. So here are some physiological changes that are really helpful when it comes to mindfulness. We often see a decrease in heart rate or a slowing of the breathing rate. So instead of those shallow breaths that I was talking about, a decrease in that analytical rumination kind of thinking, for example. And then there's more of those behavioral benefits that we were talking about a little bit earlier. So increased energy and productivity, improved concentration and memory. So reminding yourself, like, I'm working on what I'm working on right now, even though I might have 10 other assignments, bringing myself back to where I am right now. It can often reduce insomnia or fatigue. It can help with a lot of hypertension like headaches. And it can also increase self-confidence and emotional management and improve pro-social behavior, which I think is really important for students and helping students at this age especially think about ways to manage their own behavior or their own emotions. So before we get started on the strategies, I'm just going to pause for a second. I'll allow any participants to post something in the chat if there's something more you'd like to chat about or something stood out for you, you have any questions. I see that someone posted anger, especially from adult math students. Thank you so much for posting that and pointing out that pattern that you're noticing. I really appreciate that. Right. I'm just going to ask everyone to mute themselves again, just in case you're not muted, just to help with minimizing noise. And then I will go back to the presentation. All right, so let's get into some strategies. There are some guidelines that can be really helpful for practicing mindfulness strategies, whether you're a parent, a student, or a child, or a teacher, educator, just a community member. So, thinking about practicing mindfulness strategies for yourself or for you and your family can be really helpful if you're thinking about practicing with family or class to practice together. So, doing it with your family or your class, practicing every day if you can. So, for example, finding a time of day that might be most helpful, like mindful mornings, 5 or 10 minutes in the morning, in the evenings, right before bed. Finding a quiet location can often be really helpful. Practicing again at regular times. Assuming a comfortable position, which is either laying down or sitting with your back straight and feet on the ground. Loosen any tight clothing can feel helpful for breathing. And also making a decision. Oops, that's a typo. Not should not be there, but making a decision to let go of other things you might be thinking about during this time. And here are some questions to keep in mind, questions to ask yourself or questions to ask your students or your team. So, what was that experience like for you? Things you might have noticed, similar to the mindful seat we did earlier. Anything in your body, your thoughts, your feelings. What might have felt familiar to you? What might have felt unfamiliar? What was maybe surprising about the experience? What were you curious about or wanted to learn more about? And something that I like to do in my groups is really working with the students to figure out when the strategy might be helpful in everyday life. So, for example, we might do a breathing strategy and encouraging students to identify when might I use this breathing strategy, which typically comes about when doing e-learning or doing homework, school assignments, things like that. So, our first strategies are related to mindfulness of the breath. And as we spoke about it before, breathing really reflects our level of tension. When we're under tension, we're often taking really shallow, rapid breaths that are coming from our chest area. When we're more relaxed, we're breathing more from our diaphragm, which is right below our chest. We're taking more full, deep breaths into our abdomen. And some activities to do are taking 3 mindful breaths, which we're going to do right after this, and belly breathing. So sometimes with younger kids, if you have a younger kid at home, for example, or sometimes I do it too, like you can just put an object like a sock or something soft on your belly and just watch your belly go up and down to see where the breath is going in and out. And then there's mindful breath counting, which is a student favorite. So I will explain this one since it is such a student favorite. Really, this is about breathing in for 4 counts. So you count to 4 as you breathe in. You hold it at the top for 4. So hold breath. And then you breathe out for 4. And then you do that 3 more times. So 4 times in total, breathing in for 4 seconds, holding at the top for 4 seconds, and then breathing out for 4 seconds. So we are going to do some breathing right now. And again, similar to our mindful seat, I'm going to ask everyone to either sit up straight in your seat with your feet planted on your ground, or if you're laying down, just stretching your legs out in front of you. And again, you can close your eyes if you wish to close your eyes. We will start by being aware of just 3 breaths. So bringing attention to the first long inhale and then the first slow exhale. Perhaps just noticing the way the air feels as it enters your body and leaves your body. Noticing the space between the exhale and the next inhale. Slowly breathe in the second inhale. Bring awareness to that moment between the end of that inhale and the beginning of the exhale, and then breathe out. Rest in the quiet space between the exhale and the last inhale. And when you're ready, take one more long breath in. You may notice that this breath has a beginning, a middle, an end. Pause, breathe out, let go. And if you feel like you'd like to take a couple more breaths just on your own, please feel free to do so. And when you're ready, just coming out of that moment of stillness back to the PowerPoint, opening your eyes if they were closed. I'm sorry about that. My dog just growled. So I also want to encourage you to think a little bit about when breathing might work well for you. And again, feel free to post that in the chat. Sometimes, for example, that breathing works really well for me is in transitions between meetings or therapy sessions. If I'm feeling a little bit stressed or overwhelmed, I'll just slow down for 10 seconds even and just take a few deep breaths, and that can help to reset me. So just thinking about when this might work well for you if you connect to this breathing exercise. And then we've got mindfulness of the body, thoughts, and emotions. So really connecting our mind with our body and having that ability to track our body sensations. So paying attention to what our body tells us. Oftentimes our body is really giving us clues to how we might be feeling. There's these little nuances that our body usually lets us know with, but we're not necessarily always in tune with our bodies or paying attention. So I like these kinds of strategies to help students or myself even just pay attention to what is my body trying to tell me right now about what's going on for me. So we've got progressive muscle relaxation, and there's lots of awesome recordings online that you can find. And towards the end, I'll also, on the last slide, just type out a few, or in the chat, type out a few apps that are really great for mindfulness that include progressive muscle relaxation, which is really just tensing and untensing, releasing the muscles in our body. So you can start from head to toe or toe up to head. And really what you would do is just tense each part of your body. So for example, fists, clench them and then unclench them. And then clench elbows and then unclench them, and then keep working up that way. We're actually going to do the mindful flower stretch. So I'll just hold off on that one for a moment. Body scans can also be really helpful. And this is just, again, the apps that I'll include at the end will be helpful for this. But body scans are really just paying attention to all the different parts of your bodies and noticing the sensations. So again, you can start from top down or bottom up and really just noticing, are there sensations I feel in my toes right now? What am I feeling in my toes? And then similar to the mindful seat that we just did. And then a favorite of mine these days is joint movement. And I really like this because it can help us just get in touch with moving our bodies lightly. So with joint movement, you would go through each of the joints in your body, starting from toes to ankles to knees to hips to wrists, elbows, and shoulders and neck, and just rotating each parts of the joints, noticing how you might be moving the joints, what it's like to move those joints. And I find that that can be really helpful for the students that I work with. Okay, so we are going to do some stretching. I'm just going to stop the share again really quickly just to see if there's anything in the chat. Don't quite see anything. Okay, so let's start up again. All right, we're gonna do the mindful flower stretch, which is one of my favorites. And what I'm gonna ask everybody to do is to kind of slump over in your chair. So bending your body, your torso over your legs if you can. And if you're kind of more in that laying down position, again, just slumping your torso over. So this is sort of a posture of a wilted flower, so to say. As you're in this position, I want you just to take notice of what it feels like in your brains and bodies to be slumped over like that. What are you feeling? What are you thinking? What's happening for you right now? And now take a deep breath in. And as you breathe in, I want you to start to stand or sit up just a little bit taller and more upright. On the out breath, just hold yourself in the slightly more upright posture. And then breath by breath, slowly lifting your torso up more and more, stretching your body and your back upward until you're either completely standing up or completely sitting upright. And if you feel like you want to stretch your hands up to the sky, feel free to do that. Out to the side, just on your resting on your knees, you can also do that. So going from that wilted flower position to blossoming like a flower opening up. And in this pose, begin to notice how your breath, your body, and mind might feel a bit different than when you were slumped over like a wilted flower. And I'll just take 10 seconds or so to have each of you reflect and think about what that experience felt like for you, and if there's a place where you'd like to stretch a little bit more, or encourage your students or children to stretch a little bit more. I know for me, something that's really helpful with stretching is when I'm sitting all day, especially now in these really strange and uncertain times, it can be really helpful just to get up and do a big stretch with hands all the way up to the sky, reaching over a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, and that can feel really nice for the body. So that's a time where that really helps me out. So let's get into mindful awareness and sensory based. And so this is really just being aware of our surroundings. So I often have students telling me things, for example, like, oh, I just walked past the room that I was supposed to go to and totally forgot I was going to go in there. So really when we're talking about mindful awareness and sensory based, it's being aware of where we are and using our senses to be aware of that. So we're going to go through grounding on the next slide, but some other examples of sensory-based mindful awareness is finding 5 new things. So for example, I'm holding this pen and it's really about just looking at the pen and maybe noticing 5 things about the pen that I might not have noticed before. So I'm noticing it's kind of shiny when the light reflects off of it, for example. So really just looking at a familiar object and noticing new things about it. And then something that's really helpful for a lot of the students I work with, again, can be mindful humming or listening to music. So really feeling the music you're listening to. What do you like about the beat? What resonates with you? Mindful walking can be especially nice right now, but just getting outside and taking notice of your walk. So using your senses to notice, oh, the birds are singing, or I really like the way the light is shining down on those tree leaves. Things like that, just what you would notice naturally, taking a walk more mindfully. Mindful eating is a popular one with students I work with, but really slowing down eating to take notice of what the food might taste like. Does the food make a sound? What happens if I just let the food rest on my tongue for a moment? Do I get other sensations or tastes that come from it? Does my food smell like something? So really just slowing down that eating process. And then gratitude fits into here. So what are the things that I feel grateful for when I think about using all of my senses? Is there something I saw today, something I heard today that I feel grateful for? So let's do a grounding activity. And really, it's just going to be about us using a few of our different senses to just take notice of where we are right now. So you can either write this down or just take notice in your head. And again, feel free to share in the chat what this is like for you. But I want everyone to just pause, take a few slow breaths, and ask yourself, what are 3 things I can hear right now? What are 3 things I can hear? Next, let's move to what are 3 things I can see around me right now. So just taking a look around and noticing 3 things that you see. Then when you're ready, what are 3 things I can feel right now? What can I feel? What can I touch? Also taking notice of anything that you might taste right now in the air, or anything you might be smelling right now. When you're ready, just coming on back to this space. One thing I really like about grounding is that for me, it feels impossible to do this exercise and not be present and mindful. So when I'm encouraging myself or my students to use senses to take notice of the environment around, it encourages that sense of mindfulness. Like, I'm here in this present moment. This is what I see. This is what I hear. And this is what I'm feeling right now. Then there's other strategies such as visualization. And this has been a popular one in the mindfulness groups lately. But what visualization is really is related to imagery. It's the language of the unconscious mind. So, for example, when we dream at night and we see vivid images in our mind's eye. So really what we're doing is that in waking life, we're deliberately trying to use images to help modify the way we might feel, our internal state, and our behavior. So an activity that I really like to do with students is encouraging them to find a safe place or a place that is a good memory for them, something they really like using all of their senses. So really just closing their eyes. And I have a script in a couple slides from now that can help students kind of find that safe place. What can I hear there? What do I see? Is there anybody with me, for example? And really just being in that place and creating a really vivid image of that place. So we are actually going to do a visualization example. And for this, similar to the other activities, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes if you feel comfortable with it, and just sit with your spine up against the chair, or if you're laying down, just stretching yourself out. You're walking along a beautiful deserted beach. You are barefoot, and you can feel the firm white sand beneath your feet as you walk along the sea. You can hear the sound of the surf as the waves ebb and flow. The sound is hypnotic. It's relaxing you more and more. The water is a beautiful turquoise blue with white caps far out where the waves are breaking. Near the horizon, you can see a small sailboat gliding smoothly along. The sound of the waves are breaking on the shore, and it lulls you deeper and deeper into relaxation. You draw in the fresh, salty smell of the air with each breath, and your skin glows with the warmth of the sun. You can feel a gentle breeze against your cheek as it ruffles your hair. Taking in this whole scene, you're feeling calm and at ease. I invite you to take a few more deep breaths and take a look at around where you're at right now. And when you're ready, just coming back to the space. Again, thinking about when you might want to use visualization in your life and when it might be helpful to use it with students or children that you might have. So often the feedback I've heard from students that I work with is that they really like using visualization when they're going to sleep at night. So just thinking of a place that makes them feel calm and happy or safe and creating that image in their mind. So here's a template for creating your own visualization. And again, I'll send out this PowerPoint so that you have this, but just again, encouraging yourself or your student to think of a place where you are very relaxed. What do you see? Describing it in detail. Colors, shapes, sounds, what time of day, is there a temperature? Is there anybody else there with you, for example? So we have neared the end of the presentation, and I'm just going to close this here and head over into the chat. And I'm going to do some reading of the question that is here. And for anybody else that would like to be posting questions, please do, and I will work to answer them right now. So I'm just going to pause for a second and read. Right. So this first question here, if everyone's reading along with me, is talking about how when a student is triggered, how quickly a student might ramp up and finding it kind of difficult to deploy some of these strategies, which absolutely I can understand that. So the question here is asking how to break that cycle to get himself to a point where he can create that space to respond. And so absolutely, I can see that it can go from 0 to 100 really quickly. And sometimes what can be helpful is having just some more of those tactile types of strategies. So maybe encouraging the child to take space in those moments. So maybe using squishies, having something to squeeze, maybe taking space. Maybe there's a corner, a safe space that your child can go to where he can have some of these materials or engage in some of the things that might make him feel a little bit calmer before he can employ some of those strategies. And usually in those moments, taking breaths can feel helpful, exiting the situation can feel helpful, just counting can feel helpful, or having those tactile strategies can feel really helpful. And I am happy to talk more about this. If you feel like you need some other specific strategies, please let me know. Then another question here is, can you talk more about the mindfulness component, the attitude, intention, and attention, and what they mean and how to do this? Absolutely. Let me go back to that slide there. I'm still sharing the screen. Okay, so over here, we've got attitude. And so what I mean by attitude there is really just coming into noticing ourselves with a curious attitude. So often, again, I think a lot of the times the students I work with might be judging themselves or being upset or frustrated with themselves. So really just trying to come into it with a curious attitude, asking myself, like, I wonder what this is about, or I'm curious what's going on for me right now. So coming into it with that curious, open type of attitude. And what that means, and that would feed into the intention again. So the intention would be about bringing ourselves back to this present moment. And again, really just having ourselves be open to what is here for us in this present moment right now, accepting what's here in this present moment right now, observing what's here in this present moment right now. And that would help us focus our attention. So as I talked about before, often we're stuck in the past or we're stuck in the future. So it would really be about bringing our attention back to this present moment. So over here, the adjectives that I used are parts of these attitude, intentions, and attention. So again, meeting ourselves in that place of non-judgment, accepting that we are going to have a lot of different feelings, coming at ourselves with a more compassionate attitude, wanting to learn and be curious about our experiences. Oh, how can we listen to the presentation again? I understand it's recorded. Yes, I started recording it after the first mindful seat activity at the beginning. So I will have this presentation saved to my computer, and then we will email it out to you along with the PowerPoint. Oh, I saw that Dr. Morrison answered that underneath. Let's see. Earlier, you presented a list of unhelpful thinking styles and is wondering if there are specific counters to each of those styles. Many of them resonate with me in my observations of my son, and I would love to be able to help him identify ways to counterbalance those thoughts. Absolutely. That's a really great question. And that I'm really glad you brought that up. That is something that I wanted to mention that I forgot to mention, that yes, we all have these unhelpful thinking styles. Every single one of us do, but they're not permanent. We can work on them and we can challenge them. And there are specific counters to each of those types of styles or questions that we can ask ourselves to challenge our thoughts. And I can also include a list of some of those thought challenging questions along with the PowerPoint, if that would be helpful. So really it would be about finding the evidence for this thought right now. Is there a reason that I would be feeling this way? Or is there evidence in my environment that would challenge why I would be feeling this way? Oh, perfect. So yes, I will find a good worksheet for you and send along to everybody. Let's see. Anything else from anybody? I really appreciate the participation and the feedback and questions. And I wanted to just pop this slide back up here because there is an exit feedback form. Can you do part 2 for this presentation? Let me just clarify, what do you mean about a part 2? Sure, like a follow-up presentation to check in about different types of strategies, or even going through more in depth about the strategies that I talked about. Is that what you mean? Yeah, absolutely. I can talk to my supervisor more about doing like a mini skills or a follow-up to this, because I do think there's so many ways, and that is something that I should mention. So I'm glad that you asked this. There's so many ways to do these strategies, and not just the ways that I talked about. These are just some of the ways in which I'm using in the mindfulness groups, but I would be happy to talk more in depth about them. Awesome. Sounds great. So for the feedback form, please fill that out and let us know your feedback. And my email is also included there for anybody who might have a question that they want a more detailed answer to, or just to follow up about anything else in general. And I'm also going to just type in the chat right now some of the apps that are really helpful that I use with my students, so that you have them here. Let's see. Oh, thank you, Leslie. I really appreciate that. And then my last app, which one is my favorite, Stop, Breathe, Think. So we've got Calm, Headspace, and Stop, Breathe, Think. And those are really great. Calm is really nice before bed, to be honest. And Stop, Breathe, Think can be really helpful as a way to help slow down too and help with that emotion regulation. So again, if there's any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me and email me. And thank you so much for the feedback. I really appreciate all of the participation, and we will send the recording out to everybody. Thank you so much. All right. Have a good night.